My dad said it's too risky. When I asked for $65,000 to start my tech company, then he took a $625,000 loan for Joseph's BMW and failed dreams. Now he wants me to sell my home to save them? I kicked them off my doorstep and now. I 34. Male-in for most of my life, I believed that hard work and persistence would eventually earn me the respect and support I craved from my family. I was wrong. Dead wrong. But that mistake led me to build something they never could have imagined. And when they came crawling back with their hands out, I had only 4 words for them. Get off my property. This story starts with 2 brothers and parents who somehow convinced themselves that love was a finite resource that could only be given to one child at a time. I'm the older brother by 3 years. Joseph is 31, and from the moment he could walk, he was the center of our family's universe. Not because he was particularly talented, but because he had this uncanny ability to make everything about himself while playing the victim when things didn't go his way. Growing up, I was the responsible one. Homework done without being asked, room clean, chores completed. Joseph was the charmer who'd flash that crooked smile, and suddenly everyone forgot he'd just broken something or failed another test. My parents, Robert and Linda, ran a mid-sized accounting firm. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When I was 12 and my computer science teacher recommended a $600 summer coding camp, my father said it was too expensive. But when 11-year-old Joseph decided he wanted horseback riding lessons at $150 per session, my parents somehow found room in that same budget for a full semester, complete with gear and boots. At 16, I wanted to take advanced computer science classes for $800 a year. Too expensive, they said. But when 15-year-old Joseph decided he wanted to join an elite travel baseball team costing $8,000 a season, my parents found the money. They even bought him a $1,200 bat. Finn, honey, you're already so good with computers. You don't really need formal classes, my mother explained with that patient smile I'd learned to hate. But Joseph's coach says he has real potential. This could lead to scholarships, maybe even a professional career. Joseph's real potential lasted exactly 1 season before he quit after getting benched for missing practices. Total cost, over $12,000. My computer science program, still too expensive. When I graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA and a partial scholarship to State University, my celebration dinner at Olive Garden lasted 30 minutes before the conversation shifted to Joseph's difficult transition period, which was mostly skipping classes and getting caught smoking weed behind the gym. My parents launched into their rescue plan: an $80 per hour tutor 3 times a week, reduced chores, easier course load, maybe private school if his grades didn't improve. What about Finn? My uncle asked. What's the plan for college funding? The uncomfortable silence said everything. Finn is so independent, my mother finally said. He's already gotten that partial scholarship, and he's been working part-time. He'll be fine. And that was that. My graduation dinner became a family planning session for Joseph's academic rescue mission, while I sat there wondering what I'd have to do to get even a fraction of their attention. I learned that day that being the responsible one just meant being taken for granted, but it also taught me something else. If I wanted success, respect, or security, I'd have to build it myself. And I did. I put myself through college, worked 25 hours a week at the campus IT help desk, took out student loans for the rest. Joseph got a full ride from our parents, who suddenly had plenty of money for tuition, room and board, a meal plan, and a brand new Jeep Wrangler for his 18th birthday. The excuse was always the same. Finn, you're so independent. You've always been able to figure things out on your own. Joseph needs more guidance, more support. What they really meant was that I was convenient to ignore, and Joseph was exhausting to deal with. So they chose the path of least resistance. The Jeep was the last straw for me. I'd been driving a 1998 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it and a broken air conditioning system. I'd saved up $3,000 working summers and weekends to buy a decent used car, something that wouldn't break down in the middle of my commute to campus. When I mentioned this to my parents, my father suggested I keep driving the Honda until it completely died. 2 weeks later, Joseph came home from his graduation party driving a brand new Jeep Wrangler. Bright red, lifted suspension, premium sound system. My mother was practically in tears, talking about how proud she was that they could give him such a nice graduation gift. It's important for Joseph to have reliable transportation, she explained to me later, when I asked how they could afford a $35,000 vehicle after telling me I should drive my dying Honda until it literally stopped running. What about my transportation? I asked. Your Honda still runs, doesn't it? That was the moment I realized I was never going to be their priority. Not when I was 12 and wanted to learn coding. Not when I was 16 and wanted advanced classes. Not when I graduated with honors. Not ever. After college, I landed a job at a small software company in Austin called TechFlow Solutions. The pay was decent for an entry-level position, $52,000 a year, and the work was challenging. More importantly, I was good at it. Really good. Within 6 months, I was debugging code that had stumped developers with 5 years more experience. Within 2 years, I was leading development projects. Within 4 years, I was managing a team of 12 developers and pulling down $85,000 annually. I was learning everything I could about the business side of tech, staying late to sit in on sales calls, reading every book I could find about startups and venture capital. I subscribed to TechCrunch, Wired, and Harvard Business Review. I attended local entrepreneur meetups on weekends and networking events after work. I was obsessed with understanding not just how to build software, but how to build software businesses. Joseph, meanwhile, had dropped out of college after 3 years and 6 different majors. He'd started with business administration, switched to communications, tried marketing, dabbled in sports management, flirted with psychology, and finally landed on general studies before giving up entirely. He'd moved back home and was working part-time at a friend's father's car dealership while talking about his big plans. The plans changed every few months, but the pattern stayed the same. Big dreams, zero follow-through, and constant financial support from our parents. First, he was going to start a luxury car rental business. Then he was going to get into cryptocurrency mining. Then he wanted to become a social media influencer. Then he discovered day trading. Then it was real estate flipping. Then back to luxury car rentals. But with a twist. This time, he'd also offer chauffeur services. Each new idea was presented to our parents with the enthusiasm of someone who just discovered fire. Joseph would create elaborate PowerPoint presentations, print out articles from Entrepreneur magazine, and talk for hours about market opportunities and projected profits. And every time, without fail, my parents would nod along like he was pitching the next Amazon. I watched this cycle repeat for years, sitting at Sunday dinners while Joseph explained his latest scheme, and my parents hung on every word. When he talked about crypto mining, my father actually researched graphics cards to help him build a rig. When he mentioned day trading, my mother opened a joint investment account with him. When he pivoted to real estate, they started driving around with him to look at potential flip properties. None of it ever went anywhere. The crypto rig mined exactly 0 coins before Joseph got bored and sold the components. The day trading account lost $8,000 in 6 months. The real estate venture never got past the window shopping phase. But somehow, Joseph's failures were always reframed as learning experiences, while my successes were treated as expected outcomes that required no celebration or acknowledgement. By the time I was 28, I'd saved $35,000 and had identified a gap in the market that I was uniquely positioned to fill. During my 4 years at TechFlow, I'd worked on projects for dozens of different industries, but construction companies were consistently the most frustrated with their software options. Construction project management is incredibly complex. You're dealing with multiple subcontractors, constantly changing timelines, material deliveries, weather delays, permit issues, inspection schedules, and budget constraints that shift daily. The software solutions available were either generic project management tools that didn't understand construction-specific needs, or industry-specific tools that were so complex they required dedicated IT staff to operate. I'd been moonlighting on a concept for months, building prototypes on nights and weekends. The idea was specialized project management software for mid-sized construction companies, firms that were too big for basic project management tools, but too small for enterprise-level construction software. I'd talked to dozens of contractors and construction managers during my research. The response was overwhelmingly positive. These companies were desperate for something that could handle their specific workflows without requiring a computer science degree to operate. One contractor, a guy named Bill, who ran a residential construction company with about 40 employees, put it perfectly. We need something that can track our jobs, our subs, our materials, and our schedules, without making us feel like we need to hire a tech guy just to enter data. I'd built a working prototype that addressed exactly that need. It was intuitive enough for a foreman to use on a job site, powerful enough to handle complex multi-phase projects, and designed specifically for the construction industry's unique requirements. More importantly, I had validation. I'd shown the prototype to 15 different construction companies, and 12 of them said they'd pay for the software if I could build the full version. I had letters of intent totaling over $180,000 in potential first-year revenue. The problem was, I needed capital. not just for development costs, but for proper market research, legal fees to set up the business entity, trademark and patent applications, initial marketing, office space, and enough runway to support myself while I got the company off the ground. I'd done detailed financial projections showing I needed approximately $65,000 total. I had just over half of that saved up, which meant I needed about $30,000 more to launch properly. I could have gone to a bank, but getting a business loan without collateral or an established business history was nearly impossible, especially for a tech startup. I could have looked for angel investors, but that would mean giving up equity in something I believed could be huge. The obvious solution, at least in my mind, was to ask my family for help. This wasn't some pie-in-the-sky request. I had a detailed business plan, market research, financial projections, and letters of intent from potential customers. I wasn't asking for charity. I was offering them a chance to invest in what I genuinely believed could be a million-dollar opportunity. I spent 3 weeks preparing for the conversation. I had the business plan professionally printed and bound. I created a presentation with slides showing market size, competitive analysis, revenue projections, and a clear timeline for profitability. I even had my uncle, who worked in finance, review the numbers to make sure everything looked reasonable. I scheduled dinner at their house for a Sunday evening in March. Joseph was there, as usual, lounging in the living room playing Grand Theft Auto while I helped my mother set the table. I'd brought a bottle of wine and flowers for my mom, hoping to set a positive tone for the conversation. During dinner, I waited for the right moment, then launched into my presentation. I started with the market opportunity, explained the problem I was solving, demonstrated the prototype on my laptop, and showed them the letters of intent from potential customers. I've been working on this for the past year, I began, pulling out the printed business plan I'd spent dozens of hours perfecting. There's a real need in the construction industry for specialized project management software. The existing solutions are either too generic or too complex. I've built a prototype that addresses this gap, and I've validated the concept with potential customers. My father barely looked at the papers I'd placed in front of him. He was cutting his steak with the mechanical precision of someone who wasn't really paying attention. "Finn, you already have a good job," he said, without looking up. "You're making decent money, you've got benefits, you're building a career. Why risk all of that for some pipe dream?" "Because this isn't a pipe dream, Dad. I've done the research. I've validated the concept. Construction companies are dying for better project management tools, and what's available now is either too complex or too generic. This addresses a specific need in a growing market." I opened my laptop and showed them the demo. The interface was clean and intuitive. You could see job timelines, track subcontractor schedules, monitor material deliveries, and generate reports with just a few clicks. "Look at this," I said, clicking through the features. A project manager can see the status of every job in their pipeline. They can identify bottlenecks before they become problems. They can communicate with subcontractors directly through the platform. This solves real problems that cost these companies thousands of dollars in delays and miscommunication. Joseph looked up from his phone long enough to glance at my laptop screen. "Looks complicated," he said, then went back to scrolling through Instagram. My mother chimed in with the comment that still burns in my memory. "Honey, you know we think it's wonderful that you're so ambitious, but starting a business is incredibly risky. Most of them fail. And you don't have any business experience. Which is why I need the capital to do this right," I pressed on. "I'm not asking you to fund some fantasy. I'm asking for $30,000 to bridge the gap between what I've saved and what I need to launch properly. And it's not a gift. It's an investment. I'll pay you back with interest, or you can take equity in the company." I showed them the financial projections. Break even within 18 months, profitability by year 2. Conservative estimates showing $500,000 in revenue by year 3. My father set down his fork and looked at me with the expression I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The look that said I was being unreasonable. "Finn, we're not venture capitalists. We're accountants. We deal in certainties, not maybes. Starting a tech company is basically gambling, and we don't gamble with our retirement fund." "But this isn't gambling," I insisted. "I have letters of intent from 12 different construction companies. That's $180,000 in potential first-year revenue. I have a working prototype. I've been in the industry for 6 years. I understand both the technical requirements and the business needs." "Letters of intent aren't contracts," my father said dismissively. "And potential revenue isn't actual revenue. What happens if these companies decide they don't want your software after all? What happens if a competitor launches something similar? What happens if you can't scale the business?" Every question he asked was reasonable from a risk management perspective, but what frustrated me was that these were all solvable problems, not deal breakers. Every business has risks, Dad. But this is a calculated risk with real market validation. I've spent a year researching this opportunity. I've talked to dozens of potential customers. I've analyzed the competition. I've built and tested the product. This isn't some random idea I came up with last week. Joseph, who had been scrolling through his phone during the entire conversation, suddenly looked up. Maybe you should just stick with what you're good at, Finn. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. The dismissiveness in his voice was like a slap in the face. Here was my younger brother, who had never successfully completed anything in his life, telling me to stay in my lane while my parents nodded along. Think about it logically, my father continued. You're asking us to risk a significant amount of money on something that might work out. And even if it does work out, there's no guarantee you'll be successful. The tech industry is brutal. Companies fail all the time, even ones with good ideas and smart people behind them. Every business is a risk, I shot back, feeling my composure starting to crack. But this is a calculated risk with real market validation and proven demand. Finn, my mother said in that patronizing tone I'd heard my entire childhood, we just want what's best for you. And what's best for you is stability. You have a good job, good benefits, a steady paycheck. Don't throw that away chasing some fantasy. The word fantasy hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent a year of my life building something real, something that solved actual problems for real customers, and my own mother was calling it a fantasy. This isn't a fantasy, Mom. This is a legitimate business opportunity. I have customers ready to buy the product. You have potential customers, my father corrected. There's a big difference. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was already decided. My parents had made up their minds before I'd even started talking. They weren't evaluating my business plan or considering the opportunity. They were rejecting it based on their preconceived notions about risk and success. My father's final word, we can't support this venture, Finn. It's simply too risky. We have our own financial future to consider, and we can't afford to lose $30,000 on something that might not work out. I drove home that night feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not just because they'd said no, but because of how they'd said it. Like I was a child with delusions of grandeur instead of an adult with a legitimate business opportunity backed by research and market validation. But here's the thing about rejection. Sometimes it's exactly the motivation you need. I went to work the next morning with a fire in my belly I'd never felt before. If my family wouldn't believe in me, I'd prove them wrong another way. I spent the next 3 months researching alternative funding options. I applied for a business line of credit using my house as collateral. I looked into SBA loans. I even considered crowdfunding, though that was still a relatively new concept in 2019. The business line of credit turned out to be my best option. It took 3 months of paperwork, financial statements, and meetings with loan officers, but eventually I got approved for $35,000 at 8.5% interest. Combined with my savings, I had enough to move forward with the business. I gave my boss 6 weeks' notice and spent every evening and weekend for the next month and a half preparing for the transition. I incorporated the business, set up accounting systems, leased a small office space, and hired my first employee, a front-end developer I'd worked with at TechFlow, who was excited about joining a startup. By September, I was working on my company full-time. I called it ConstructFlow, and our tagline was Project Management Built for Construction. The first year was brutal. 18-hour days, ramen noodles for dinner, stress levels that probably took years off my life. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if my parents had been right, if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving a stable job to chase an impossible dream. But slowly, steadily, it started working. My first customer signed up in November, a residential builder in Dallas who'd been in my original research group. My second customer came in January, a commercial contractor in Houston who'd heard about us through word of mouth. By the end of year 1, I had 8 paying customers and $140,000 in annual recurring revenue. Meanwhile, Joseph had a new dream. He decided he wanted to start a luxury car rental company catering to high-end clients who wanted to rent Lamborghinis and Ferraris for special occasions. Weddings, anniversaries, prom nights, corporate events. He'd seen something similar in Miami and was convinced it would work in our area. He'd done zero market research, had no experience in the automotive industry, had no understanding of insurance requirements or liability issues, and his business plan consisted of a PowerPoint presentation with pictures of expensive cars he'd downloaded from manufacturer websites. But he had something I didn't: complete and unwavering support from our parents. The conversation I wasn't supposed to hear happened at a family barbecue in June, about 9 months after they'd turned down my request. My cousin David was getting married, and my extended family had gathered at my parents' house for an engagement party. I'd gone inside to use the bathroom and was walking back through the kitchen when I heard my father's voice from the dining room. "We've looked at the numbers, and we think we can make it work," he was saying. "The initial investment is substantial, but Joseph's done his research, and the potential returns are impressive." I stopped walking and pressed myself against the kitchen wall, just out of sight. "How substantial are we talking about?" I heard my uncle ask. "Well, he'll need about $625,000 total to get started properly. We're looking at taking out a loan against the business and our house, but with the projected revenue, we should be able to pay it back within 3 to 5 years." I stopped breathing. $625,000 for Joseph's luxury car rental fantasy. The same parents who told me that $30,000 was too risky were about to gamble more than $500,000 on my brother's complete lack of a plan. "That's a lot of money, Robert," my uncle said carefully. "It is," my father agreed. "But this is Joseph we're talking about. He's got vision, he's got drive, and he's got connections in the luxury car market. Plus, the rental market is really underserved in our region. There's definitely demand for high-end vehicles." I wanted to walk into that room and ask my father exactly what connections Joseph had, and exactly what research he'd done, and exactly how luxury car rental was less risky than proven project management software with validated customer demand. "What kind of cars are we talking about?" my aunt asked. "Lamborghinis, Ferraris, McLarens, Porsches." Joseph's voice joined the conversation. "High-end stuff that people want to drive but can't afford to own. The rental rates are incredible. We're talking $500 to $1,500 per day, depending on the vehicle." "And the insurance?" my uncle asked. "That's all factored in," Joseph said confidently. "The margins are still excellent even with comprehensive coverage." I seriously doubted Joseph had done any research into specialty insurance for exotic car rentals, which is notoriously expensive and complex. But my parents seemed convinced. "We're so proud of him," my mother said. "He's really thought this through. He's even identified specific vehicle models that offer the best return on investment." I'd heard enough. I slipped out through the back door and sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to process what I'd just learned. My parents, who'd rejected my business plan because it was too risky, were about to bet their financial future on Joseph's fantasy of renting Lamborghinis to strangers. 2 weeks later, Joseph was driving a brand new BMW M5 that he claimed was part of his fleet research. The car cost $105,000. And according to Joseph, he needed to understand the luxury car market before making decisions about his rental fleet. The BMW was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Joseph bought a used Porsche 911, $75,000, a Lamborghini Huracan, $250,000, and a Ferrari $488, $300,000. Each purchase was justified as market research or fleet development, but the luxury car rental business never actually launched. Joseph spent his time driving around town in different exotic cars, posting Instagram photos at high-end restaurants and nightclubs, talking about his upcoming business launch while never actually taking steps to create a legitimate company. He did spend tens of thousands of dollars on a website that never went live, marketing materials for a company that never opened, and business development trips to Miami and Las Vegas that were really just expensive vacations where he posed next to other people's luxury cars. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. By year 2, I had 37 customers and $580,000 in annual recurring revenue. I'd hired 4 employees and moved into a larger office space. By year 3, I was closing in on $1 million in revenue and had started getting acquisition offers from larger companies. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my parents were hemorrhaging money on Joseph's fantasy, I was building exactly the kind of successful tech company they'd told me was impossible. But the success came with a price. The stress of running a growing business while watching my family implode financially was taking its toll. I'd gained 20 pounds from stress eating and wasn't sleeping well. I'd started avoiding family gatherings because I couldn't stand listening to Joseph talk about his business, while my parents nodded along supportively. The first hint that my parents were in serious financial trouble came during a phone call with my mother in November of my 3rd year in business. "Finn, honey, I hope you're doing well with your little software company," she began, which immediately put me on guard, because my mother only used that artificially sweet tone when she wanted something. "It's going really well, Mom. We're actually on track to hit $1 million in revenue this year." "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Listen, your father and I were wondering if you might be able to help us with something. We're having some cash flow issues with the business, and we were hoping you might be able to loan us some money to get through the next few months." I almost laughed. After everything they'd put me through, after rejecting my request for help, and then throwing away more than $500,000 on Joseph's delusions, they had the nerve to ask me for money. How much are we talking about, Mom? Well, we'd need about $50,000 to cover some immediate expenses, just until we get back on our feet. And Joseph? Is he contributing to this solution? There was a long pause. Joseph is dealing with some challenges right now, Finn. The car rental business didn't work out the way we hoped, and he's looking for new opportunities. What kind of challenges? Another pause. He's had some legal issues. Some of the cars were repossessed, and there are some disputes with creditors. It's all very complicated. Of course it was complicated. Everything with Joseph was always complicated. I was willing to bet he'd been making payments on luxury cars with credit cards and personal loans, probably lying to creditors about his income and business prospects. Mom, I'm sorry you're going through financial difficulties, but I can't just write you a check for $50,000. That's a significant amount of money, and given what happened when I asked for help 3 years ago, I think you can understand why I'm not jumping at the chance to get involved in the family finances. Finn, this is completely different, she said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from childhood arguments. We're not asking you to invest in some risky business venture. We're asking for help from our son during a difficult time. You mean the same son whose risky business venture you refused to support? The one that's now generating 7 figures in revenue? That's not fair, Finn. We did what we thought was best at the time. No, Mom. You did what was convenient at the time. You supported Joseph's dreams while dismissing mine, and now you want me to bail you out of the consequences. The conversation ended with my mother in tears, and me feeling like the villain for not immediately opening my checkbook. But I'd learned something important over the past 3 years. Financial boundaries are just as important as emotional ones. Over the next 6 months, the calls became more frequent and more desperate. My parents were facing foreclosure on their house. The accounting firm was bleeding clients as word spread about their financial troubles. Joseph had disappeared entirely, apparently living with some girlfriend in Colorado while avoiding the legal consequences of his failed business ventures. I learned through my uncle that the situation was even worse than I'd imagined. Joseph hadn't just bought the luxury cars with loans against my parents' assets. He'd also taken out credit cards in the business name, borrowed against the cars themselves, and even convinced my parents to co-sign on additional loans for business development. The total debt was approaching $800,000, secured against everything my parents owned. The cars had been repossessed, leaving them with massive loans and no assets to show for it. Joseph had fled the state, leaving my parents to deal with angry creditors and potential legal action. The final call came on a Tuesday evening in May. I was at home reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. It was my father, and he sounded terrible. Finn, I need to be completely honest with you. We're going to lose everything. The house, the business, our retirement savings, all of it. Dad, I'm sorry to hear that, but wait, just let me finish, he interrupted. I know we haven't always been the most supportive of your business, and I know you're probably angry about the Joseph situation, but we're desperate. We've lost everything betting on your brother, and now we need your help. I waited for him to continue. We've been talking to a financial advisor, and he says the only way to save the house is if we can come up with $180,000 to pay down the debt and restructure the loans. We know that's a lot of money, but with your business doing so well, you want me to give you $180,000. Not give, he said quickly. Loan. We'd pay you back as soon as we get back on our feet. Dad, how exactly do you plan to pay me back? You just told me you're losing the business and facing foreclosure. Well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. Our advisor says if you were willing to sell your house and move back home for a while, we could use that money to save everything. It would just be temporary until we get everything sorted out. I actually had to put the phone down for a moment. They wanted me to sell my house. The house I'd worked my ass off to buy. The house I'd used as collateral to start the business they'd refused to support, and move back in with them so they could fix the mess they'd made betting on Joseph's fantasies. Dad, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want me to sell my house, uproot my life, and move back home so you can avoid the consequences of spending $625,000 on Joseph's failed business? Finn, please don't make this about Joseph. This is about family. This is about helping your parents when we need it most. No, Dad, this is exactly about Joseph. This entire situation exists because you chose to bet our family's financial future on his delusions while telling me that my actual business plan was too risky. We made mistakes, he admitted, but we can't change the past. We can only ask for help now. You're right, Dad. You can't change the past. And the past is that when I needed help, when I had a legitimate business opportunity with real market validation, You told me it was too risky and you couldn't support it. But when Joseph wanted to play with expensive cars, you mortgaged everything you owned to fund his fantasies. Finn, I'm not finished, I cut him off. I built this business with my own money, taking my own risks, working 18-hour days for years, while you all wrote me off as a failure waiting to happen. And now that it's successful, now that I've proven you wrong, you want me to liquidate everything I've worked for to bail you out. There was silence on the other end of the line. The answer is no, Dad. I'm not giving you $180,000. I'm not selling my house. I'm not moving back home. You made your choice 3 years ago, and now you get to live with the consequences. Finn, we're your parents. We raised you. We loved you. You loved Joseph, I interrupted. You raised Joseph. You invested in Joseph. I raised myself and I built this business myself, and I'm keeping it myself. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room for a long time, staring out at the yard I'd landscaped myself, in the house I'd bought with money I'd earned, thinking about the path that had led me to this moment. 3 weeks later, they showed up at my house. I was working in my home office when I heard the doorbell ring. I glanced out the window and saw my parents' car in the driveway, the same Honda Civic my mother had been driving for 8 years since they'd sold her newer car to help fund Joseph's ventures. I opened the door to find my parents standing on my front porch, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen them. My father had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. My mother looked like she'd been crying for days. "Hello, Finn," my mother said softly. "Mom, Dad." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What are you doing here?" "We were hoping we could talk," my father said. "Face to face. It's important. I think we've said everything that needs to be said." "Finn, please," my mother pleaded. "We drove 3 hours to see you. Just give us a few minutes." Against my better judgment, I gestured toward the chairs on my front porch. We sat down, and for a moment, nobody spoke. It was a warm afternoon, and I could hear kids playing in the neighbor's backyard. Normal sounds of a normal life, which felt surreal given the conversation I was about to have. Finally, my father broke the silence. "The foreclosure is final. We have 30 days to get out of the house." "I'm sorry to hear that. The business is gone too. We had to sell it for practically nothing just to pay off some of the debt. Your mother and I are looking at bankruptcy. Where's Joseph in all this?" My parents exchanged a look. My mother answered, Joseph is in rehab. He had some problems with drugs, the stress of the business failing, and some legal issues. And it's been very difficult." So there it was. The golden child, the one they'd bet everything on, was a drug addict in rehab while they lost their home and their business. "We know we made mistakes," my father continued. "We know we should have supported your business when you asked. We know we put too much faith in Joseph and not enough faith in you." "Okay, we're not asking you to fix everything," my mother said. "We're just asking for enough help to get back on our feet. Maybe help with a deposit on an apartment, something small until we figure out what's next." I looked at these two people who had raised me, who had fed and clothed and housed me for 18 years, who had also systematically undermined my confidence and dismissed my achievements and invested their future in my brother's failures. "Mom, Dad, I need you to understand something. 3 years ago, when I came to you with a business plan and asked for help, you didn't just say no. You made me feel stupid for even asking. You told me I was being unrealistic and that I should be grateful for my steady job and stop chasing fantasies." They both looked down at their hands. "And then, less than a year later, you took out a $625,000 loan to fund Joseph's luxury car rental dream. No business plan, no market research, no experience in the industry. Just Joseph saying he had a good feeling about expensive cars. We know," my father said quietly. "We know we made the wrong choice." "Do you?" I stood up from my chair. "Because even now, even sitting here asking for my help, you still haven't apologized for rejecting my business when it actually had potential. You're sorry you bet on Joseph, but you're not sorry you didn't bet on me." "Finn, that's not true," my mother started. "It is true, Mom. You're here because you need money, not because you realize you treated me unfairly. If Joseph's business had succeeded, if you weren't facing foreclosure, would you be here apologizing for not supporting me?" Neither of them answered. "The truth is, you've never seen me as anything more than the backup plan, the responsible one who'll always be there to clean up the mess. Well, I'm done being the backup plan." I walked to the front door and turned back to face them. "I've worked 16-hour days for 3 years to build something you told me was impossible. I've proven that my risky idea was actually a solid business opportunity. I've succeeded despite your lack of support, not because of it." "Finn, please," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "We'll pay you back. however long it takes. With what money? You just told me you lost the house and the business. You have no income and no assets. What exactly are you going to pay me back with? We'll figure something out, my father said desperately. We'll get jobs, we'll work, we'll do whatever it takes. Dad, you're 62 years old. Mom, you're 59. You've never worked anywhere but your own accounting firm. What jobs are you going to get that will allow you to pay back tens of thousands of dollars while also supporting yourselves? The truth hung in the air between us like a weight. The answer is no, I said firmly. I'm not giving you money. I'm not helping you find an apartment. I'm not co-signing any loans. I'm not letting you move in with me. You made your choice when you decided Joseph's fantasies were worth more than my proven business plan. Now you have to live with that choice. How can you be so heartless? My mother sobbed. We're your parents, and I'm your son. The son you dismissed and ignored and overlooked for his entire life. The son whose success you still can't acknowledge even when you're sitting here asking for help. I opened my front door. I think you should leave now. My father stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Finn, if you change your mind, I won't. I watched them walk to their car, and I'll admit there was a moment where I almost called out, almost told them to wait, almost offered them something just to ease the pain I saw in their faces. But then I remembered the feeling of sitting in their dining room 3 years ago, laying out my business plan, explaining my vision, asking for their support, and hearing my father tell me it was too risky, while my brother smirked and told me to stick to what I was good at. I remembered the months that followed, when I worked 18-hour days and ate ramen noodles and stressed about every expense while they funded Joseph's luxury car fantasy with more money than I'd asked for by a factor of 20. I remembered all the times throughout my childhood when my achievements were glossed over while Joseph's mediocrity was celebrated. All the times I was told to be grateful for what I had while Joseph was given everything he wanted. And I closed the door. That was 6 months ago. I haven't heard from them since. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.